What is the ego, and how should we relate to it? Should it be strengthened, rejected, or transformed? Today we want to explore a third possibility, that the ego is not a fixed identity or enemy, but a flexible mental function that can be skillfully used. By bringing together psychological and philosophical perspectives from both Western and Eastern school of thoughts, we aim to show that cultivating a flexible, decentered relationship to the self supports psychological resilience, clarity, and inner peace. Eastern and non-dual philosophies have long questioned a fixed ego. Heidegger's late concept of Gelassenheit, usually translated as releasement or letting be, invites an attitude of serene openness rather than willful control. Heidegger suggests we cultivate a tranquility toward things, being comfortable to take it or leave it rather than grasp or resist. In other words, one learns to handle events without over-identifying or fighting, a laid-back stance that frees up the self from needless struggle. David Hume famously compared the person to a bundle or collection of different perceptions which succeed each other with inconceivable rapidity, a continuously changing flow rather than an unchanging soul. Nagarjuna's middle way in Mahayana Buddhism likewise rejects any permanent self. Nagarjuna taught that nothing has an autonomous, unchanging core, including persons. This is not utter nihilism, but rather a pragmatic pointing out that clinging to a rigid I is misguided. The Dalai Lama and other Buddhist teachers explicitly say that personal identity is a kind of delusion, and that each of us is a self that turns out to not actually exist. Hence, clinging to this illusory self is what causes suffering. In short, many traditions see the self not as a solid entity, but as a dynamic process. In this light, the ego is not a must-have core, but a usable perspective that can be held lightly. Mainstream Western psychology has often assumed a stable self, or ego, that should be maintained. But even within psychology, there are challenges to that view. As early as the 1970s, psychologist Gordon Allport noted that the concept of the self is slippery and perhaps not strictly necessary. Everything that has been explained by reference to a self-concept can be explained as well. Without it, he argued. In fact, Allport quipped that if psychology's horizons were broader, we would not need the concept of self or of ego, except as a convenient label. In practice, therapeutic approaches like acceptance and commitment therapy and mindfulness-based therapies replace ego strengthening with flexibility training. Rather than enforcing a particular self-image, therapy may encourage self-distancing, means viewing one's troubles from a broader perspective, self-compassion, or commitment to personal values regardless of fleeting thoughts. These approaches reflect growing evidence that psychological rigidity, for example, fixating on ego threats or constantly defending self-image, often backfires, leading to anxiety and defensiveness. In short, rather than clinging to a fixed ego or seeking its outright abolition, modern Western therapy benefits from treating the ego as malleable, a capacity that can expand or contract as needed. To make this idea concrete, picture yourself as a driver steering a car. You use the ego's goals and plans like steering, but you are not the car itself. Some situations might call for speed or prudence, but you can also release control, for example, hit the brakes when needed. As one analogy goes, just as the driver controls the car but is not the car, you are the conscious agent using your body and thoughts without being identical to them. We can engage with the roles and stories we hold, like characters in a scene, but also recognize that these roles are situational. This doesn't mean being passive or without values. Rather, it means wielding the ego skillfully, ready to adapt. Empirical research and centuries of philosophy converge on a middle path. The ego need not be its own tyrant or eliminated entirely, but it thrives when seen as a flexible function of mind. In practice, this means treating our sense of self as a lens or instrument that can shift focus when needed. By doing so, we honor valuable aspects of the ego, our memories, values, and perspectives, without being controlled by them. In our daily life, we are stable enough to act with purpose, yet flexible enough to change course when reality calls.